The Paladin. Honestly, it's got to be my second, maybe third favorite class in all of 5th edition. Not because it's good, because I just like the idea of this armored knight avenger style class being somehow both the tankiest and also being able to dish out a shit ton of damage. But unfortunately, in 5th edition, it doesn't really happen that way. And when it comes to reworking the Paladin, there are a few ways you can go about it that is impactful, but also not overtly changing the identity of the Paladin. What you don't want to do, I will emphasize this, what you don't want to do is make the Paladin's primary feature of Divine Smite into a spell. That is not what you want to do. As, yes, it is you can make it always prepared so they never have to prepare it, but you have the problem of it still using a spell slot. You have it requiring an action type. Usually it's free, but either way, it still requires a spell slot. It still requires you to use an action of some kind, whether that be part of the attack or what have you. And now that it's a spell, it could be counterspelled. It could be counterspelled, it could be dispelled, it could be countered by anti-magic. So basically, Paladin being a martial class that has spells, but has an alternative use for those spell slots, as opposed to casting spells like its Ranger Brethren, is not good. Because if you make it a spell, you just become a worse spellcaster and only a slightly better martial. Not even by much. So, what do you do to change the Paladin? More correctly, what do I plan to do to change the Paladin? That's actually a very tricky option, because there's a very fine line between making the Paladin feel strong and making the Paladin function. Right now, the biggest outcry from Wizards of the Coast when it comes to their Paladins is that they've made Divine Smite a spell. Let's not do that. I think they've also limited it to once per turn. I haven't actually had a chance to look at the material entirely. That's just what I've heard in the optimization circles with the looks, with the sneak peeks of classes, is that they've changed it from a ability to a spell, and I don't like that. But I think they also changed it to once per turn, which means you can only get it twice per round because of your opportunity attack, which does suck. It does lower its effective power, but they didn't scale it up to compensate for the fact that you're losing out on all that damage. So now, essentially, you're dealing possibly less damage than a rogue, which is really sad. And the fact that the rogue can do this more often, more frequently, and it doesn't cost them anything to do slightly more damage than you, and it does kind of suck. So what do I plan on doing? Well, I plan on Paladins being the only class that has access to a portion of my armor and weapons revision, where they are going to be the only ones that have access to the higher tier armors, and they're going to be the only ones that have the ability to wield larger shields and larger weapons in one hand, as they are meant to be armored defenders. They're meant to be there in the front defending the party with their huge bodies and they're huge weapons and they're huge shields. That's what they are intended to be. So they are meant to be the armor tank. They're going to stand there and they're going to be imposing based on the fact that they have to be dealt with because they can deal damage, but if you try to damage them back, they'll just damage you even more. So, how do I plan on doing that? Well, Divine Smite's going to be moved back to an ability, obviously. It's going to be an ability, standard. However, somebody is honking in this parking lot right now. But I plan on giving them a resource that isn't spells, because paladins will no longer use spells. They will now have things called blessings. Because typically, with clerics, they're more divine. With paladins, they're not so divine as they are devout. You can be a paladin without worshipping a god. You can be a paladin just by having a very set amount of regulations, rules, and ideals that you follow, and that's what gives you power. So instead of being devotees of a god, they are more of people who give you minor blessings. They give you minor feats of what appear to be godlike power, but instead of it being tied to a god, it's just their innate sense of ability. And that will come in the form of a resource similar to fury and stamina from the fighter and barbarian. I haven't settled on a name yet. I might use stamina from the fighter. I'm not entirely sure, but I also might go with something like resolve or faith or courage or something like that. And basically, while they have this resource, it is a finite resource that they have, but they can gain more by doing certain things. And when they gain more, they can use more of their their blessings. And Divine Smite will feed off of these in the same way that Divine Smite fed off of spell slots. But their Divine Smite will just do basic amounts of damage and apply a debuff to the enemy. And then each subclass that the Paladin has will work with the debuff in a different way. So, for instance, the Ancient's Paladin might grant them an ability like the Marked Creature. They lose a resource at the start of the turn, and it gives the Paladin a use of their resource. You know, kind of like how the Paladin of Ancients right now is sort of the anti-magic tank, and then the what is it called? The Paladin plus subclass, the Devoted, Oath of Devotion. There we go, Oath of Devotion. That one would be more of the standard Paladin plus subclass, so it'll be baseline Paladin features, slightly amped up a little bit with some of its own uniqueness, and then the Avenger will be the sort of damaging one. The Glory will be the mobility based. There's a lot of things that have to go into the Paladin, but its entire identity is that it's going to be the sort of slow lumbering tank that goes onto the battlefield, stands there with their shield and sword and says, "You have to deal with me now. And if you do not deal with me, things are just going to end terribly for you. Your choice." And if either way the enemies lose, because either they deal with the Paladin and they get very nice drink. They either deal with the Paladin and thus I wouldn't say waste, but they waste their turn dealing with the Paladin as a threat because they don't have a choice, or they ignore him and thus give other people, primarily the damage dealers like the Barbarian, the Rogue, and stuff like that, the opportunity to deal damage to them. And either way, the Paladin is winning, because either they're tanking the damage for the rest of the team, or they are dealing their own damage in return by being ignored, and still granting the benefits of their mark. Yeah, spoiler alert, their ability is going to be a mark like it is in 4th edition. Who would have guessed? Who would have guessed? But yeah, I think Paladin needs... I wouldn't say he needs the least amount of work, but compared to every other class, the Paladin is the easiest to convert to a different way of doing things, because he kind of already has systems in place that work okay. The problem is the fact that he's using spell slots, and spell slots generally are better used on good spells rather than divine smites, because divine smites do less damage and don't offer anything else besides the damage. And realistically, you're only ever using your divine smites on critical hits to maximize the damage. But Paladins are in this weird place where they're supposed to be a half-caster, but their spell list is terrible. They don't really get any good smite spells, and the smite spells that they do get that are good, they don't get until way later in the game. And even at that point, it's far too late for them. They're already falling way far behind everybody else, and it's very sad. They're not as bad as Artificer, though. And they're not as bad as Artificer. But yeah, I think that is what I'm going to do for Paladin. Change their resources around. Give their capstones a little bit more oomph. As of right now, all their power in terms of their capstone is in their subclasses. So I think every Paladin should have a transformation style ability as a capstone, but I think the subclass itself should dictate what additional benefits you get. So like the Paladin being unable to die while in this state is a good generic Paladin move, but then like the Ancients can siphon magic, the Avenger could do more damage, etc., etc. So it just kind of stacks on top. I think that'd be a very interesting way of doing it. Not sure though. We'll see. But yeah,